Here is part 6 of my 2017 NFL season recap. In the last video, I talked about the wild card losers, the Bills, Chiefs, Panthers, and Rams. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the teams that lost in the divisional round, the Tennessee Titans, the Atlanta Falcons, the New Orleans Saints, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So here we go. So we start off with probably, honestly, the second worst team in the playoffs this year behind the Bills, and that was the Titans. And going into the season, I had a lot of expectations for them. I mean, they had a 6-game improvement from the year before, had their first win season in a while, and I thought they were going to make the playoffs and easily, honestly, win the AFC South. And at first, it really didn't look that good first. They started off 2-3, and they had 2 back-to-back blowout losses. I mean, they fucking lost 57-14 to the Texans, for crying out loud. But then they turned around, and before you know it, they were 8-4 and easily leading to take the 3rd seed in the AFC playoffs. And they still were leading ahead of the Jaguars at this point. But of course, even though they were 8-4, they were a terrible 8-4 team. And thankfully for them, they had that very good conference record, which would help them make it the playoffs. And then after that, they went on to lose 3 straight, thankfully to NFC West opponents, so it didn't hurt their conference record. But now they're 8-7. They have to host the Jaguars. They have to beat them to have any shot to making the playoffs, so they're done for. But luckily for them, they did win. And thanks to the Ravens losing, they actually went up to the 5th seed instead of having to be the 6th seed visiting the Jaguars after they just beat them. So they go to the Chiefs to get things started. And of course, it looked like the blowout that it was going to be, 21-3 going to halftime. But then all of a sudden, the Chiefs actually turned it around. They scored 19 unanswered points and pulled off the upset, 22-21, which then sent them up at a visit at the Patriots. And they tried to fight so hard, and they actually got the first score of the game. But the Patriots were just too much for them. They couldn't hold up, and they ended up losing 35-14, ending their season. So, I mean, they did hit expectations. They made the playoffs for the first time since 2008. And they actually won a playoff game, too, which was quite impressive on the road, too, in an upset performance that they did. But this team was not a 9-7 team at all. They are very lucky that they even made the playoffs. They should have been a losing record team, honestly. And surprisingly, really head-scratching, they were actually considering firing Mike Milwaukee, their coach, even though they were on the verge of making the playoffs. And then when they did make the playoffs, it wasn't even a guarantee that they were going to keep him. But then when they beat the Chiefs, they said he was going to come back in 2018. But then a couple days after they lost to the Patriots, they fired him after he didn't want to make no coaching changes on the team. Which is really like, what the fuck? That was just so really weird how that finished out the rest of the season. But they brought in Mike Vrabel, or whatever his name is. He was the Texans' defensive coordinator. Yeah, why bring in the defensive coordinator for the worst defense last year in terms of points allowed? That's really head-scratching. And, of course, a former linebacker with the Patriots during their early 2000s when they were actually a defense-first team. So, yeah, he's got a lot of work prepared for him. So, what do the team need to do in order to make sure they can make it back to the playoffs in 2018? Well, there's really not much I think they can do, to be honest with you, because I don't really expect a lot from them next year. They probably should find a running back since DeMarco Murray is inconsistent after that incredible season he had last year. Maybe they should find a stud at wide receiver for Marcus Mariota to throw with. But more importantly, they need Marcus Mariota to actually play like the franchise quarterback they should be. I mean, the first 2 seasons he was pretty good, but he just couldn't stop getting injured. I think he played the entire season this year, and he was terrible. I mean, for fuck's sake, I think when he visited the Steelers, he threw like 4 or 5 interceptions or something like that. This was definitely a terrible season for them. I mean, for him and the Titans. So he's got to really turn around if they want to have any shot at making the playoffs. He's got to be that franchise quarterback they need him to be. But unfortunately for the Titans, they underachieved. They were very lucky that they made the playoffs and actually won a playoff game, but I really don't expect much for them next year. The schedule's going to be tough. The Jaguars, who knows if they might fall off a bit or not, but I think they're going to be right there in the mix around the Titans record. I think the Colts and Texans are going to bounce back a bit, so the AFC South's going to be very interesting, but I just don't really have a lot of faith in the Chiefs. I think they're going to fall off a bit next year and miss the playoffs. Then we get to the Falcons, and going into the season, I did not think there was going to be much going for them this year. I thought they were going to have a Super Bowl hangover. They still had a very bad defense. They were just too lopsided, and I thought they were going to be in a very tough disadvantage when they had the Buccaneers come up behind them, and I thought the Panthers were going to rebound and such. So I really didn't expect anything at all for the Falcons. And even though they started off 3-0, they were not at all a very good team when they started off that 3-0. As a matter of fact, they should have honestly lost their 2 games at the Bears and Lions. But they still managed to start 3-0. But then reality started to set in. They didn't want to go 4-4 for crying out loud. And they did not look good at all. And it looked like they really were going to be bottoming out. And looked like they were not going to get anywhere in the NFC side of the bracket. But then they all of a sudden turned it around. Their defense played pretty good. Their offense started to get back in rhythm. And before long, they were deep into the mix in the playoffs, especially since they had the tiebreakers over their main competitors, the Lions, Cowboys, Seahawks, and Packers for a little bit. And they actually went 10-6 and managed to sneak back into the playoffs as the 6th seed. So they had to go on the road at the Rams to get things started. And their defense actually shut down the number 1 offense in the league, and they spanked them pretty good. They really showed that the Rams were not ready for the playoffs. And then they actually had to visit the Eagles, and I thought they actually could have pulled it off, since we all didn't think their Eagles were going to do anything after Carson Wentz went down, and they really just limped their way into the playoffs pretty much after that. And it was looking like the Falcons were going to do it. They did have a lead pretty quickly into the game, but the Eagles fought back hard thanks to their defense, and then the Falcons, they made it down to like the goal line, and then they did that really boneheaded decision where they threw, didn't they do like 4 straight passing plays when they were at the goal line for crying out loud? Fucking run for once, for crying out loud. I think they had a timeout still or something like that. They could have maybe had time to try one run at least and maybe get an extra bit of yards, and maybe you could have maybe gotten the touchdown, win the game, and then maybe have a challenge against the Vikings in the NFC Championship. Maybe you could have beat them and we have our Super Bowl rematch for crying out loud. But of course that didn't happen. But in the end, this was a good season for them. They made it back to the playoffs, avoided the Super Bowl hangover, and honestly, I think this team was actually better than last year. Yeah, that offense wasn't as good as last year, but it was more balanced, and more importantly, that defense was good. Last year, it was terrible. That team was heavily lopsided to the offense. This team, if you look at their stats, they are pretty damn good across the board. In fact, all their stats are within the top half of the league. Their worst stat being their points, offensive scoring, which was just 15th, which that's not necessarily that bad. So they set themselves up really good going into 2018. So what do they need to do? Most importantly, they really got to get more balance on defense. That main strength for the Falcons defense is their pass rush. They need to work on their secondary too, and maybe their linebackers as well. That way they can be a little bit more balanced and not have to focus more on their front 4. Also, they probably should get some more balance in their receiving corps, as Julio Jones is really the only thing they got as an offensive weapon when it comes to passing. They need someone else. That way they can get less pressure off of both Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, because Julio got a whole bunch of passing yards, but he only got 3 touchdowns this year. That's pretty bad. So they need to maybe find someone else to complement him, just like they have with their running game with that 1-2 punch with Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. But other than that, I have a lot of good feelings for the Falcons going into 2018. Now, I have some concerns about the NFC South. I don't think all 3 teams are going to make it back to the playoffs. In fact, I'm pretty confident one of them, and maybe 2 of them, are going to have to regress next year, to be honest with you. I think the Panthers probably will regress, and I think the Falcons are right behind them. But the Falcons, unlike the Panthers, are in a much better situation. So the Falcons, I think, could be a challenge to make it back into the playoffs and maybe challenge the Saints for the NFC South. Then we get to the Saints, and wow, this was quite a surprise. Now, I did not agree with pretty much anyone online pretty much when it came to predictions. I thought the Saints were going to pretty much be what they were the last bunch of years, like 7-9, with a strong offense but a terrible-ass defense that's going to hold them back. And they start off the year 0-2 and looked like nothing different this year than the last 3 years. But then all of a sudden, something changed. That offense actually became balanced, which they needed that running game to work, and that defense actually played, well, not necessarily that good, but it played just good enough for the Saints to go on to start winning 8 in a row out of complete nowhere. This was unbelievable. And then they went 3-3 the rest of the way, but they had a winning season, made the playoffs, and won the NFC South. Who would have thought the Saints would get that, for God's sake? So they start off the playoffs hosting the Panthers, and just like they did the entire season, they continued to beat them. They swept them 3 times this season, and they barely pulled that one off. They had to stop a comeback from the Panthers. But then they went to the Vikings, the team that they lost the first game of the season, and it was not going good for them to start. The Vikings were up 17-0 in the first quarter alone. It looked like the Vikings were going to just run away from it, with it. But then the Saints came back, and they actually took the lead. Then the Vikings retook the lead, and then the Saints retook the lead with like 30-something seconds remain or something like that. It looked like they were going to actually pull it off. But then the Minneapolis Miracle happened, and the Saints season ended just like that. What a shame, too, because this team was legit. Look at those offensive stats. Top 5 in everything. And their defense. I mean, just 2 years ago, I think they had the worst defense in the league in terms of scoring. Now they're 10th. And their rest of their stats are okay. But that was just good enough for them to actually make the playoffs. Holy shit. What a massive turnaround this defense had from the previous years. And the Saints really are a Super Bowl contender as long as they can keep that running game being efficient and that defense playing solid, which they need to do. Now, what do the Saints got to do to maybe make a Super Bowl run in 2018? There is one thing in particular they have to do. I don't know if they've resolved this yet, but remember, if you all don't know, Drew Brees was under his last year of his contract, so he's a free agent technically. Saints, you must shut the fuck up and give whatever Brees wants for a extension and just do it. You can't let him get away from you. You just turned this team around, made the playoffs for the first time in 4 years. This might be your last chance in God knows how long for you to maybe make a Super Bowl run. You need to keep Drew Brees at all costs. So if you haven't done it yet, whatever Drew Brees wants, you shut the fuck up and you sign it with a smile on your face. Other than that, they just need to keep that running game and defense efficient and good, and that's pretty much all they need to do. So, like I said earlier with the Falcons, I don't think all 3 of them are going to be back in the playoffs. I think one of them, or maybe 2 of them, are going to miss the playoffs this year. But of all the teams, I think the Saints I trust the most to make it back and win the NFC South. But they're going to have to be watching out because the Falcons and maybe the Panthers could still be on their ass to challenge to take the lead along with the Buccaneers coming back. So the NFC South I look really forward to, but I think the Saints have a good future going into 2018. And then we finish off this video with the Steelers. And after finally making it back to the AFC Championship last year, I thought them, other than the Patriots, really were the only 2 teams that were going to match up for the AFC contender for the Super Bowl. Now, of course, I was not like everyone else. I do not think at all the Steelers could beat the Patriots at Foxborough. The only way they're going to make it to the Super Bowl is if they have home field advantage throughout and then play the Patriots that way or play someone else in the playoffs. So they still had that triple threat with offense, Big Ben, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell, and that defense was starting to finally show up and actually be good since the first few years with this offensive juggernaut. They couldn't get anything going defensively. And of course, as usual, they start off 2-0. They lost a game to the Bears, which I predicted. They didn't beat the Ravens, But then, of course, as I warned them, when they hosted the Jaguars, they got destroyed, and Ben threw 5 interceptions. They were 3-2, and you're wondering, because the Bengals were starting to turn around at that point. The Ravens were still right there. Was the window for the Steelers starting to close on them? But no, they then went on to turn it around, and they went on to win all but their one game against the Patriots, which they blew, to finish 13-3 and had the 2nd seed in the AFC playoffs. So they start up to the playoffs with their bye, hosting the Jaguars in the divisional round, and I warned the Steelers in my video, don't underestimate them like you did in the regular season. And of course the Steelers, being the idiots that they were, and still high on thinking about taking on the Patriots in the AFC Championship, they completely forgot about the Jaguars, and the Jaguars went in there, embarrassed them once again, and they lost in an offensive shootout, 45-42, and while most people would probably say it's an embarrassing fashion, I don't. I expect that, so that loss was really not a surprise to me. Now, luckily for the Steelers, Ben is pretty confident that he might come back next year, so that's good. At least you got your quarterback for next season. You already got Antonio Brown locked up. You really should try your best to try and re-sign Le'Veon Bell to a long-term deal, because without those 3 together, you're not really going anywhere on offense, and you need to keep that defense strong as well. So what do the Steelers need to do to finally get over the hump and actually make the Super Bowl that they've honestly should have made the last bunch of years? First and foremost, they need to stop losing games to teams that they shouldn't lose to. Now, the problem is with their 3 losses, like Jeff over at Schleg Day ripped them a new one for losing to the Bears. I don't agree with that because I predicted they were going to lose to the Bears, and the Steelers don't have a good history of playing the Bears, so I don't think that's really their fault. They played just like I expected. I can't really blame them for losing to the Jaguars because I also warned them, and they just laid an egg once again, that one. The loss against the Patriots, however, I think was unacceptable. You clamped down on the Patriots throughout the entire game, and you let Brady go downfield with Gronk on a few plays to take the lead and then to win? Come on, man. You can't do that. When you clamp down the Patriots that hard, you need to clamp down on them for the entire game. You shouldn't have lost that game, and if you didn't, you would have been 14-2 and would have hosted the Titans in the divisional round, and you would have had to host the Patriots in the AFC Championship, and then you maybe would have beaten the Eagles in the Super Bowl. But then most likely not, because you have a bad history against the Eagles too, so who knows. But you got to stop blowing games that you can't lose. And that, honestly, is the main thing that's going to keep the Steelers from getting back to the Super Bowl with this very limited window they have. Because who knows if Ben's going to be back next year. Who knows for sure if he's going to be fully back this coming year either. You don't know if Le'Veon Bell is going to be re-signed. So you got to make 2018 that year. Stop losing games that you need to not lose, and then maybe you can finally get to the Super Bowl. Now, even if Ben comes back and Le'Veon Bell is signed long-term, I think the Steelers are going to fall off a little bit because 13-3 is a pretty high bar to meet. But I still think they're going to win the AFC North and probably challenge for first-round bye easily. So I don't expect them to be like any worse shape than they are now, but man, like I said, if you want to make a Super Bowl, you have to start winning the games that you need to. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments, as hopefully soon the final part of this series will be done as I talk about the conference championship losers and then the Super Bowl loser and winner, the Jaguars, Vikings, Patriots, and Eagles, to finish this series off. So see you soon for that.